December 7, 1941, dawned with a calm that belied the storm approaching the Pacific. The Hawaiian Islands rested in the quiet glow of sunrise, palm trees swaying over the soft sand. Waves lapping lazily against the harbor of Pearl Harbor. Sailors and airmen moved through the base with routines honed overhears, morning drills, maintenance checks, and the hum of normalcy in a world teetering on the edge of global conflict. America, despite its attention to European struggles, had not fully grasped the immediacy of the war in the Pacific. There was tension, yes, whispers of Japanese aggression in distant waters, but nothing could have prepared those stationed at Pearl Harbor for the storm descending from the skies. At precisely 7:48 a.m., the first silhouettes of Japanese aircraft appeared over the horizon. From the vantage point of the harbor, the planes seemed distant, almost serene, floating like dark clouds against the brightening sky. Yet in that quiet moment, a sense of unease began to ripple through the sailors on deck. Then, the first bombs fell. Explosions tore through the air with a violence that shattered the calm. A deadly punctuation to the routine morning. Ships rocked violently as decks buckled and fire erupted across the moored vessels. The USS Arizona, magnificent and imposing, was ripped apart as fire consumed her. All igniting the waters round her like a river of flame, smoke curled into the sky. A dark, ominous signal to the world. War had come to America's doorstep. Chaos reigned. Sailors scrambled, manning anti-aircraft guns with shaking hands, firing at the swift, precise Japanese formations. Planes screamed overhead, each one a harbinger of destruction. The sound of machine gun fire, exploding shells, and the roar of aircraft engines melded into a deafening symphony of war. Men ran through smoke-choked decks, dragging the wounded and shouting orders over the din. The sky was a canvas of terror, black trails of smoke streaking across the blue, punctuated by sudden flashes of fire and crumbling metal. Amid the chaos, acts of courage emerged. Sailors leapt into burning waters to rescue comrades. Medics wove through debris-littered decks to tend to the injured, and officers directed the limited anti-aircraft defenses with a calm that seemed impossible in the moment. Every second was a lifetime. Every decision carried the weight of survival, not just for themselves, but for the thousands stationed at Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack was swift, precise, and devastating. Within 2 hours, over 2,400 Americans were dead. Nearly 20 ships were damaged or destroyed, and hundreds of aircraft were obliterated. The heart of the Pacific Fleet lay in ruins. News of the attack spread quickly, carried by radio transmissions that crackled across the islands and the continental United States. In Washington, D.C., President Franklin D. Roosevelt received reports of the destruction. His advisers grimly outlined the scale of the disaster for months. Intelligence had warned of Japanese aggression, but no one had predicted such a direct and lethal strike. Roosevelt understood instantly that nothing would be the same. The nation had been dragged into the war, not by a slow march toward conflict, but by a single, overwhelming act of aggression. December 7th would leave an infamy in the aftermath. The resolve of the American people hardened. Citizens from every corner of the nation reacted with disbelief, grief, and fury. Young men and women enlisted in droves, answering the call to defend a country now under attack. Factories, previously producing for civilian life, shifted to a war footing, churning out planes, ships, tanks, and weapons with unprecedented speed. The entire nation mobilized, united in the face of the challenge ahead. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not just a tragedy. It was a catalyst that transformed the United States into a military superpower virtually overnight, across the Pacific. Japanese forces celebrated their tactical success, believing the assault would cripple American naval power for years, but they had underestimated The resilience and capacity of a nation capable of extraordinary mobilization. America's industrial might, combined with the courage of men and women willing to fight for survival, would turn the tide in ways the Japanese High Command could not predict. The attack was not the end, it was the beginning of a conflict that would span islands, oceans, and years, with battles whose intensity and stakes would redefine warfare itself. By the end of 1941, the United States had declared war on Japan. Europe, already engulfed in the flames of conflict, now faced a fully committed American military machine. The Pacific theater, vast and complex, would become a crucible of strategy, heroism, and human endurance. The war that began in the skies over Pearl Harbor would ripple across coral atolls, volcanic islands, and the open ocean. It would test every sailor, soldier, and airman, and leave a legacy of courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice that would echo for generations. In the shadow of Pearl Harbor, the first sparks of an epic struggle had been ignited. From the shattered decks of battleships to the halls of Washington Power, the stage was set for a war that would demand everything from the men and women who stepped forward. Across the Pacific, an era of courage, strategy, and relentless pursuit of victory had begun, marking the birth of a campaign that would forever change the world.
The Pacific War was no longer a distant rumblet, had arrived in full, deafening force. After Pearl Harbor, the United States scrambled to respond, mobilizing ships, planes, and men across thousands of miles of open ocean. Japan, confident in its naval supremacy, moved swiftly to consolidate its gains. Islands fell in rapid succession: Guam, Wake, the Philippines, each conquest a brutal demonstration of speed, strategy, and overwhelming firepower. Yet the Americans were learning quickly. The war in the Pacific would not be a single battle. It would be a series of deadly, interconnected encounters where intelligence, courage, and sheer endurance mattered as much as firepower. May 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea. Unlike Pearl Harbor, this time the engagement would be fought entirely by aircraft launched from carriers, a new form of naval warfare that would redefine the theater forever. American and Australian forces intercepted a Japanese invasion fleet moving toward Port Moresby in New Guinea. The first shots were not fired by ships, but by planes that soared like birds of prey, diving and twisting over the open sea. Bombs tore through decks, and torpedoes streaked across the water with deadly precision. Men clung to the edges of flight decks, bracing as waves of Japanese bombers descended. Each explosion a jolt that shook both decks and nerves alike. From the carrier USS Lexington, pilots took off in tight formations, engines screaming, eyes scanning the horizon. They carried not just bombs, but the weight of their nation's resolve. Every maneuver, every evasive turn could mean the difference between life and death. On the Japanese carriers, Shikoku and Zuikaku, mirrored scenes unfolded. The tension was nearly unbearable. The air became a vertical battlefield, planes diving, rolling, and spinning, leaving trails of smoke in their wake. Ships attempted to maneuver out of range, while deck crews fought fires with hoses and buckets, adrenaline coursing through their veins. It was the first time Japan had been stopped in the Pacific, and for America, it was a taste of hyper-realization that the seemingly invincible Japanese fleet could bleed. 2 months later came the Battle of Midway, a clash that would forever shift the balance of power in the Pacific. Intelligence had revealed the Japanese plan, a massive strike to capture Midway Atoll intended to lure the remaining American carriers into a trap and destroy them. But the Americans, having broken Japanese codes, were ready. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz had placed his 3 carriers USS Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown in position to strike first. When dawn broke over the endless blue of the Pacific, torpedo planes, dive bombers, and fighters swarmed the skies. Smoke and fire erupted from Japanese decks as bombs found their marks. In the chaos, the Japanese lost 4 carriers in a single day, along with scores of experienced pilots. It was a staggering blow, one from which their naval dominance would never fully recover. Midway was more than strategy, it was courage. Young pilots launched with minimal fuel, knowing that a single mistake could send them plummeting into the sea. Crewmen risked life and limb to repair guns, fight fires, and man anti-aircraft positions amid deafening explosions. It was the triumph of ingenuity, bravery, and calculated risk over overwhelming odds. For America, it marked the beginning of the long, grueling push across the Pacifica campaign that would demand more from every sailor and soldier than any had imagined. Following Midway, Guadalcanal became the stage for a different kind of warfare. The jungle, humid and dense, concealed the enemy at every turn. Japanese forces entrenched themselves in the thick foliage, creating deadly ambushes for the American Marines arriving by night on the beaches. The island was a living enemy. Mosquitoes, disease, heat, and mud became as lethal as the bullets flying overhead. Soldiers moved in single file through the jungle, rifles poised, ears straining for the slightest rustle of leaves. Patrols faced Japanese snipers hidden in tree canopies, mines buried along narrow trails, and booby traps designed to cripple morale as much as body. Every hill and river crossing became a battlefield. Every village held secrets of resistance. Guadalcanal was not only about strategy, but the endurance of mind and body, a brutal test of what men could survive. The Americans learned quickly, adapting to guerrilla-style engagements, using the terrain to their advantage, and coordinating air and naval support to isolate Japanese forces. The island-hopping strategy, devised by planners thousands of miles away, depended on victories like Guadalcanal. Each foothold gained in the Pacific was a step closer to the Japanese homeland, but it came at a cost measured in sweat, blood, and lives. Veterans would later recall the stench of the jungle, the ever-present roar of distant artillery, and the sudden, shocking eruptions of battle in a landscape that seemed at peace one moment and lethal the next. The soldiers who survived became hardened, not by choice, but by necessity, a crucible that forged resilience and leadership under fire. By the end of 1942, the tide was beginning to shift. Japanese expansion had slowed. America's industrial might, now fully mobilized, was producing ships, planes, and weapons at an unprecedented rate. Carriers, once few, were multiplying. While experienced pilots honed their skills in combat that was now both tactical and psychological. Every encounter, from the Coral Sea to Guadalcanal, taught the Americans lessons about Japanese tactics, about the deadly combination of tenacity and honor that their enemy embodied. And every victory, no matter how small, instilled the confidence that the Pacific could be fought and won. The stage was set for a war that would stretch from the Solomon Islands to the Marianas, from the skies above Midway to the volcanic ridges of Iwo Jima. The battles were no longer abstract, they were visceral, intense, and unforgiving. American strategy had evolved. Take one island at a time, cut off Japanese supply lines, weaken morale, and push steadily closer to Japan itself. But the cost would be staggering. Men would die in jungles, on beaches, and in the black waters of the Pacific. Courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice became the currency of survival in a theater defined by distance, isolation, and relentless conflict. As 1943 drew to a close, the American forces understood the reality of the Pacific War. It would be long, bloody, and grueling. Each island, each engagement demanded everything from every man and woman involved. And yet, with every victory, hope and determination spread across the Allied ranks. Coral Sea and Midway had proven that Japanese supremacy was not absolute. Guadalcanal had shown the world that endurance, adaptability, and unflinching courage could turn the tide of battle. The first sparks of victory had been struck, and with them the promise that the Pacific could be conquered one island at a time.
The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, a vast, blue expanse dotted with volcanic islands, coral atolls, and hidden dangers for the Allied forces. Each island was both a prize and a trap. A step closer to Japan, but a deadly gauntlet that tested every sailor, pilot, and soldier. The strategy was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Capture one island at a time, establish airfields, cut off Japanese supply lines, and advance closer to the homeland in reality. It was hell incarnate. The beaches were mined, the jungles patrolled, and every hilltop fortified with machine guns, artillery, and hidden bunkers. Tarawa Atoll, November 1943, became the grim symbol of the cost of island hopping. The tiny coral island, no larger than a city block in places, was a fortress. Japanese defenders had dug deep into the sand, reinforced bunkers, and laid wire across the beaches when the first wave of Marines hit the surf. They were met with a hail of fire. Bullets tore through the water and sand, cutting men down before they even reached the shore. The ocean itself became a battlefield. Rising waves slammed soldiers into obstacles, drowning many who had survived the initial gunfire. Smoke rose from burning landing craft, oil and blood mingling in the surf, creating a landscape both surreal and horrifying. Leadership in such chaos was tested to its absolute limit. Officers and NCOs directed men under fire, moving from trench to trench, rallying the wounded, and calling in naval bombardments on enemy positions. Engineers struggled to breach coral reefs, placing pontoons and ramps under machine gun fire. Every moment was a battle against not only the enemy but the unforgiving environment. Heat, salt water burns, coral cuts. And exhaustion pressed down like an invisible enemy. Tarawa taught the Americans a brutal lesson. Victory in the Pacific came at a price measured in blood, sweat, and courage. The campaign continued through the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, the Marianas, and ultimately to Saipan and Guam. Each operation brought its own horrors and heroism. Jungle. Warfare on islands like Bougainville tested patience and endurance. Dense foliage concealed snipers, booby traps, and entire regiments of Japanese defenders. Airfields, the ultimate prize, were defended fanatically. Every plane that landed brought hope and vulnerability. Every sortie carried the potential for death. Marines, soldiers, and aviators pushed forward, often outnumbered, often cut off from supply lines, relying on courage, improvisation, and each other to survive. Kamikaze attacks introduced a terrifying new element. The sky became as deadly as the ground. Pilots, young and often untrained, dove their planes loaded with explosives directly into American ships. The first explosions were shocking, a thunderclap over the water, plumes of fire shooting skyward, decks torn apart in an instant. Sailors dove for cover, tried to fight back with anti-aircraft guns. But the sheer speed and dedication of the attackers created moments of pure panic. Ships that survived carried scars of melted steel, splintered decks, and the bodies of comrades lost in seconds. The psychological toll was immense. Every sailor understood that death could come from the sky without warning. And yet they remained at their stations, manning guns, directing fire, and keeping the fleet moving forward. Guadalcanal had taught lessons, but the Marianas campaign demanded mastery of combined arms, naval bombardment, airstrikes, amphibious landings. And jungle patrols had to be orchestrated with precision. Each island became a microcosm of the larger war, a contest of strategy, endurance, and innovation. Soldiers learned to read the terrain, anticipate ambushes, and use the enemy's fortifications against them. Medics worked tirelessly, treating wounds in makeshift hospitals under the constant threat of bombardment. Engineers repaired airfields in the rain, sand, and mud while artillery shell shook the ground beneath them. Yet amid the chaos, moments of humanity and heroism emerged. Soldiers shared rations with the wounded. Letters from home were read aloud to bolster morale, and small acts of camaraderie became lifelines. The brutality of the war forged bonds stronger than blood, men united by shared fear, courage, and the unspoken understanding that survival depended on teamwork. By 1944, the island-hopping strategy was paying dividends. American forces had established a chain of bases, stretching closer to Japan. Airfields on captured islands allowed bombing raids deeper into enemy territory, cutting supply lines and weakening morale. Japanese forces, while still fierce and disciplined, began to feel the strain of isolation and attrition. Reinforcements were limited, and every new landing seemed to chip away at their ability to resist. Iwo Jima loomed on the horizon as a symbol of the final, most brutal stage of island warfare. A small, volcanic island with cliffs and fortified caves, Iwo Jima was a fortress unlike any other. Every approach was covered by artillery, every ridge by machine guns, and every bunker was interconnected with tunnels and hidden firing positions. The Marines preparing to land knew the odds were grim, but the mission was clear: capture the island, establish airfields for bombers, and pave the way for the final push toward Japan. Across the Pacific, the human cost of island hopping was staggering. Thousands of soldiers and sailors perished in the oceans, jungles, and on beaches. Survivors carried scars, both visible and invisible, from the relentless combat. Yet the strategy worked. Every island captured brought the Allies closer to Japan and demonstrated the combination of America, an industrial power, tactical innovation, and relentless grit that would eventually win the war, island hopping was more than a military strategy. It was a crucible of human endurance. It tested every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of bravery. From the coral reefs of Tarawa to the volcanic cliffs of Iwo Jima, the Pacific War demanded the impossible from those who fought it. Yet, step by step, victory inched closer. Each island captured was a testament to planning, sacrifice, and sheer human will, a grim march across fire, sand, and blood that would bring the war to the Japanese doorstep. The volcanic silhouette of Iwo Jima rose from the Pacific like a dark omen. Its black cliffs jagged against the horizon. February 19, 1945. The first wave of Marines approached the beaches. Their landing craft slicing through cold, choppy waters, the air smelled of salt, oil, and smoke. The sea itself seemed hostile, tossing men and equipment as if the island beneath were already alive, aware of the violence to come. From the moment the first boots hit the sand, chaos erupted. Japanese defenders had transformed the island into a labyrinth of bunkers, caves, and tunnels. Mortar fire erupted from concealed positions. Machine guns cut swaths through the waves. Explosions sent sand, blood, and metal into the air, creating a maelstrom of noise and terror. Landing craft capsized. Men were dragged underwater by the weight of their gear. Every step forward was a battle, not just against enemy fire, but against the unforgiving terrain. The Marines pressed on, driven by orders, duty, and sheer will. Squad leaders shouted over the deafening roar, coordinating movements across sand, volcanic rock, and smoke-choked terrain. Medics dashed through gunfire, dragging the wounded to safety. Engineers and demolition teams advanced under relentless machine gun fire, setting charges to neutralize bunkers and open paths for advancing troops. The island was a forge, burning men in fire and fear, tempering only those who could endure the impossible. Every ridge, every hill, was contested fiercely. Mount Suribachi, the island's volcanic peak, loomed above like a sentinel. Japanese defenders had tunneled deep into its core, emerging unexpectedly to fire at advancing Marines. Flamethrowers, grenades, and artillery became essential tools for progress. The battle was measured in inches of terrain, each gain paid for with blood. By the time Marines raised the American flag atop Suribachi, a symbol captured forever in photographs, hundreds of men had died, many more were wounded, and the island was still far from secure. Okinawa, April 1st, 1945, presented a new kind of hell, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific. It involved over 180,000 troops landing on a sprawling island with rugged cliffs, rice paddies, and fortified Japanese positions, unlike the volcanic heights of Iwo Jima. Okinawa's terrain combined urban warfare with treacherous natural obstacles. Every village could conceal snipers, every hill could erupt with artillery. Rivers became death traps, with currents carrying men into enemy fire. Japanese defenders employed kamikaze tactics with increasing desperation from the skies above. Planes dove into American ships, carrying explosives and death with terrifying precision. Ships erupted in fire and smoke. Sailors trapped below deck struggled to survive, and the sound of explosions became a constant pulse in the minds of those ashore on land. Soldiers advanced through mud, rain, and smoke, encountering hidden tunnels and sudden ambushes. Civilians, caught in the crossfire, added a haunting dimension to the battle. Their homes destroyed, families scattered, lives irrevocably changed. Leadership under these conditions was tested to its absolute limits. Officers coordinated. Artillery, naval bombardment, and air support while managing the logistics of an invasion force spread across miles of hostile terrain. NCOs led squads forward, personally clearing bunkers, rallying troops, and dragging the wounded to safety. Every decision was immediate, consequential, and often life or death. The bravery displayed was staggering, yet so too was the cost. Tens of thousands of soldiers fell, their sacrifices marking the price of every inch gained. The psychological toll was immense. Men lived with constant fear and uncertainty, yet they pressed forward with determination. Camaraderie became a lifeline. Soldiers relied on each other not just for survival but for sanity. Stories of heroism abounded, medics running into crossfire to save a single life, officers refusing to retreat despite wounds, engineers neutralizing explosives with minutes to spare. The human spirit, tested against the harshest elements and the deadliest opposition, endured. By June 1945, the Allied forces had secured Okinawa, but the campaign was a sobering preview of what an invasion of mainland Japan might cost. Commanders estimated hundreds of thousands of casualties could result from an assault on the home islands. The intensity of Iwo Jima and Okinawa underscored the scale of sacrifice and the resilience required for victory. Every soldier carried the memory of lost comrades, every ship bore the scars of kamikaze attacks, and every commander understood that the Pacific War demanded not only strategy but endurance, courage, and unwavering resolve. From the coral beaches of Tarawa to the volcanic heights of Iwo Jima and the sprawling fields of Okinawa, the Pacific War had forged warriors in fire and sand. It was a war of extremes, oceans as battlefields, skies filled with death, jungles concealing enemies, and islands as fortresses. Every engagement was a crucible, shaping the men who fought and the strategies that would ultimately bring victory. The cost was staggering, yet every victory brought the Allies closer to Japan, inching toward the final, decisive moments of a war that had consumed years, thousands of miles, and the lives of tens of thousands. The sacrifices, courage, and strategic ingenuity displayed during these campaigns would echo through history, shaping the final decisions of 1945. The Pacific had been fought in extremes, but it was far from over. The ultimate confrontation, one that would forever change warfare, and the world was yet to come. Summer of 1945. The Pacific War had reached its zenith, stretching across thousands of islands, oceans, and skies. Okinawa had fallen. Iwo Jima had burned, and the Japanese homeland remained heavily defended yet increasingly isolated. Months of relentless bombing raids had reduced cities to rubble, crippled infrastructure, and shattered morale. The industrial heart of Japan was bleeding, yet the government showed no sign of surrender. Military leaders, driven by honor and desperation, prepared for a final, cataclysmic defense. President Harry S. Truman faced a decision that would forever alter the course of history. The Japanese refusal to surrender meant a planned invasion of the home islands. Operation Downfall would cost hundreds of thousands of Allied lives and potentially millions of Japanese lives. The alternative, unthinkable but increasingly inevitable, was the use of a weapon unlike any the world had ever seen: the atomic bomb. August 6, 1945. The city of Hiroshima woke under a clear sky. Ordinary citizens went about daily life, unaware that the history of war and humanity was about to change in an instant. The B-29 bomber Enola Gay flew overhead, carrying the plutonium bomb codenamed Little Boy, at precisely 8:15 a.m. The bomb detonated with a blinding brilliance, leveling buildings, igniting firestorms, and killing tens of thousands instantly. The sky glowed with an unnatural light, and a shockwave rolled over the city, flattening everything in its path. Survivors were engulfed in a surreal nightmare, the world distorted by heat, wind, and radiation, their senses overwhelmed by the scale of destruction. 3 days later, August 9th, Nagasaki faced a similar fate. The plutonium bomb Fat Man detonated over the city, reducing it to a landscape of fire and ruin. In both cities, survivors faced unimaginable suffering burns, radiation sickness, and the collapse of social infrastructure. Yet amid the horror, the message was clear. Japan's capacity for a continued war had been shattered. The Japanese leadership faced an impossible choice. Military honor demanded resistance. The reality of atomic destruction demanded surrender. Emperor Hirohito, confronting the devastation of his people, made a decision that would end the Pacific War on August 15, 1945. He broadcast an unprecedented radio address to the nation. The words were somber, resigned, and historic. Japan would surrender unconditionally. VJ Day victory over Japan was declared on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Japanese officials signed the surrender documents, formally ending the war that had consumed the Pacific for nearly 4 brutal years. Sailors, soldiers, and airmen of the Allied forces watched as the war's final chapter was written, the shadow of conflict lifting from oceans and islands that had become graveyards and battlefields. The human cost of the Pacific War was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers had died. Millions of Japanese military and civilians had perished. Cities were in ruins, economies shattered, and families torn apart. Yet in the ruins, stories of heroism, endurance, and resilience emerged. Marines and soldiers had survived impossible odds. Pilots had faced the sky filled with kamikaze attacks. Medics had saved lives under withering fire. Sailors had endured endless nights at sea under constant threat. These acts of courage became the hidden legacy of the war, quietly shaping the post-war world. The Pacific Campaign reshaped military strategy forever. Carrier-based aviation proved decisive. Amphibious landings required precise coordination, and the psychological toll of total war became a consideration in planning. The atomic bomb introduced a terrifying new dimension, ensuring that future conflicts would never be the same. Nations would rebuild, alliances would shift, and the specter of nuclear weapons would loom over global strategy for decades. Yet amid the historical and strategic lessons, the war also revealed the indomitable human spirit. Ordinary men and women faced extraordinary circumstances and endured. The stories of those who fought, sailors, pilots, marines, soldiers, and civilians, became testaments to resilience, courage, and the capacity to survive unimaginable adversity. The Pacific War ended not with a single battle, but with a culmination of relentless struggle, strategy, sacrifice, and innovation. From the coral beaches of Tarawa to the volcanic cliffs of Iwo Jima, the sprawling rice fields of Okinawa, and finally the atomic devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war had pushed humanity to its limits. Those who survived carried the memory of sacrifice, the lessons of endurance, and the weight of history on their shoulders. As the sun rose over Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, the oceans quieted, and the guns fell silent. Sailors looked out at the horizon. Soldiers stood at parade rest, and pilots folded their wings. The Pacific had been a crucible, and its warriors had emerged forever changed. The cost was incalculable, but victory painful, costly, and profound was theirs. History would remember the strategies, the battles, and the weapons, but it was the courage of men and women, facing impossible odds and enduring unimaginable hardships, that truly defined the Pacific War in fire, sand, and shadow. The final chapter had been written, and humanity had survived to tell it.